Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where I am writing a game engine from scratch. In the last video, I started working on the game entities and now we can create new game entities and add them to the scene and remove them as well. And I also started working on the components of those entities, although we can't really visualize those yet. And today I want to start working on those as well, so we have some kind of useful representation of the components in our editor and make it also ready to have different kinds of components and provide us with a means to add other kinds of components as well. Right now we have also a bug here. And for example, whenever we don't have a selection and we press here on the remove, then sometimes it will crash. And that's because if you go back here in the project layout, I don't actually check if this selected items has any items in it, right? And whenever I want to get the first one and it is empty, it will throw an exception. So I'm going to fix this method, but while I'm at it, I'm going to make sure that these selections are undoable as well. So for example, I can select these two and then select this one. And I want to be able to hit Ctrl-Z and then go back to that previous selection. That's useful because if we look at this scene here in Maya, I have these two objects selected, but it could as well have been 100 objects. And I can do something with them. And whenever I select something else, and after that, I want to go and do something with all these other objects again, I would like to actually undo my selection and retain that selection that I had before. So I think that's a useful kind of functionality to have in an editor like this. And I want to have that in the primal editor as well. Going back to the editor, I can close this now. So here in this method, I have to find out what the previous selection was and what a new selection is, so that I can define these undo redo actions. So the first thing I do, because the selection has changed, I know that this data context will be something different, right? So I'll set it to null again. And then I'll check if any items have been added to the previous selection. So if there are any added items, that means that we have some new selected items there. And again, because I don't handle the multiple selections yet, I just pick the first item that is selected. And then I'm going to determine what was selected before and what's the new selection. For that, I need a reference to this list box. So I know the new selection is whatever it's selected now, right? So that's easy, the easy part. And I know that this list contains game entities. So I'll cast it to a list of game entities, and then to a list. Now I can determine the previous selection. And that is just a new selection, except the ones that were added to this new selection. Now I know what my previous selection was and what my current selection is. I can define undo and redo actions. So in a project, undo, redo, I'll add a new action. And like always, I have an action for undo and one for redo and a name. So the name here is just that the selection has been changed. The undo action is just going back to the previous selection. And the way I can do that with the list box is that I can unselect all items first. And then I can go through each of these previously selected items and select them. Basically, I can set they have a property that's called IsSelected, and I can set that to true. And the redo action is the same, but then with the new selection. So again, I unselect all of the items and then go through all the items that are selected right now and, well, set back their selection. And I think this is all that I need to do to make the selection undoable. Let's test if that's correct. So now if I click remove, then an entity is removed. We see selection change whenever I select one. Let's go through a couple of them and then have these 3 selected. And then go back to the top one. And now if I undo this, then it should go back and select these 3 and then it should go up again. Okay, these 3 are selected and then aha. There is something wrong with this, of course. You can see it's not undoing anymore. And the reason is that whenever I reselect items here, it will run this method again because technically the selection has been changed, right? So it will add another undo action here while we are undoing. There is a fix for this to prevent adding undo actions, undo redo actions while we are undoing or redoing something. So I'll go back to our undo redo utility. And here I'll just introduce a new private field, a Boolean. And all it does is enable add. So I can here, whenever I'm undoing or redoing, I can set it to false and execute our undo command and then set it to true again. And the same in redo. And all I have to do now is here in add to check if this enable add is true. Okay, going back to our project, and then I can test if this fixed the issue. Yeah, it looks like it's working. One thing that is not here, I can see that there is a transform component here in some of these entities. So I wonder what's going on. So here there is nothing in the components list, apparently. Let's see here in game entity. I do add a component here. So whenever now I add a game entity, there is this component. Oh, the thing is, of course, that I don't call this function to actually bind these two collections together. So let's actually call this function as well. There you go. Remove all of the game entities and add them back. And now they have transform components. All right. Okay, I want to get rid of these old projects. So let's delete these here. Next thing I want to do is to continue working on this control because, well, it doesn't really have anything in it yet. So for example, I could start displaying the properties of the game entity in here. So the properties that I can display are the name and, well, of course, the list of components. So let's start with the name. So here I have a text block that says what a name is, but I want to make it so that I can actually rename the entity. So I can have it in a text box. I want to also be able to enable or disable the entities, or actually hide them or make them visible again. So there is another data member that I need, and that one would be IsEnabled. And I want to save that in the project as well. So here I use the data member attribute again. And now going back to the game entity view, I can have 3 columns. I also want to have a button that I can use to add new kinds of components to the game entity. So here on the top of the stack, I have a border to make room for this button. And in the content, I don't want just to have a name that says add component, but I also want to have a little arrow downwards, because this button will be like a context menu that whenever I click on it, it will open a menu and show me the different kinds of components that I can add, and I can choose from those and, select one and add that component to this particular entity. This path is just to draw a little arrow here using this kind of path language. And now I can, because I binded this name to the game entity's name, I can change its name. So let's try and see if that works. I deleted all the projects. And now I have to create a new one. Before I create a new one, I just want to make this so that whenever we don't have any project, we just automatically go to create project. So let's do that first before I create any new projects. So here in game project and in project browser, I can have this routine that can be run whenever the project browser is opened. And here I can check if the open project has a list of projects. So if that's not the case, so we didn't find any projects that are already there, we just scroll to the create project part. So we don't have any projects that we can open. So I disable the open project button and hide the open project view. Let me see if I have a name for these. All right. So I have to name these as well. Now I can go here and say, okay, open project view visibility is hidden. And I just pretend the user clicked this toggle button to go to create project view. So this is like the user clicked the create project button to go to create a new project. And we can't go back to open project because we don't have any existing projects. So now we can see that this one, the open project button is grayed out. We can't go back to it. If I click on it, it doesn't work. And we have to create a project first because we don't have any yet. I am going to select one of these and create. So add a couple of game entities and scenes. Let's see if I can change the name of this entity. Okay, it does change it, but there are a couple of things that are not going well. First of all, I have to, whenever I change something and I hit enter, it doesn't change the name. It only works whenever I select something else. So this field loses focus and then it will change the name. I want to have a text box control that actually changes the name whenever I hit enter and reverts back to what it was whenever I hit escape. So for example, if I don't want this change and I hit escape, then it should go back to where it was. The second thing that's not going well is I can't see any undo actions for the renaming of this game entity. So that's right, because we don't use a command for that. We just bind it directly to the game entity's name property. So let's fix those as well. I'm going to first make the renaming undoable. In the game entity class, I am going to define a command for renaming, and then I'll bind to that command instead of to this name property directly. And actually, I want to have one for this enabled as well, so I can undo and redo the state of this enable field as well. Now here in this initialization method, I can define the undo redo actions for these two. Contrary to what we have been doing till now, I can't really use this constructor anymore because it's just basically an old value that I want to remember and a new value, and I want to switch between those. So what I would like to do is to extend this this undo redo action with a new constructor that would remember what object we are trying to change and what property of it we have to reset or undo and redo. So again, here is a constructor. And I want to just know the name of the property that we changed, like the name property of the game entity. And I want to know what object it was. So there is a reference to our game entity, for example. And I need to remember the old value. So the value to undo to, and a new value. And again, a name for our undo redo action. So here we have been constructing our own undo and redo actions in the constructor. as a constructor parameter. And in the new constructor, I want to construct that undo redo action here. So I just call this old the other constructor and then have its parameter set here in this new one. Okay, here I am using the reflection of .NET platform to get the type of this instance. So in this example, we are going to pass a game entity to this undo redo action. So there's an instance of game entity, we will get a type of that. And then we will get a property with this name. And then depending on whether it is an undo action or a redo action, we are going to restore its old value or give it a new value. So we can now use this constructor instead. Going back to game entities. So I'm giving this undo redo action the name of the property I'm changing here. And the instance is just this game entity. And we actually have to determine whether we can do this or not. For example, if the new name is the same as the old name, we don't change anything. So we can't execute this command. So if this new name does not equal the old name, then we can change the name. And otherwise, we don't do anything. Okay, now I can go back to the game entity view. And here in this text box, I can see that there is no way for me to bind a command to this. So I need to modify my text box controls so they can execute commands. The way I want to do that is to do it globally for the whole application. And that's where I'm going to use a dictionary, a resource dictionary that defines the behavior and look and feel of the controls in this application. Later on, when I'm going to change the look of the application to be a bit more pleasing to the eye, I'm going to put those new designs in the dictionaries as well. So here I'm going to add a new folder and add a new resource dictionary. And in here, I'm going to have a style for the text box. So later on, I'm going to set the look of the text box here. For example, its background color and its alignment and those kind of things. And then I'm going to have a global text box style that applies to all text boxes in this application and have it respond to enter and escape keys from the keyboard input. That way we can make the text boxes so that they change their value, the text value, whenever we hit enter. So now we have a little problem, and that's that whenever we create a dictionary like this, we don't have a code behind to define event handlers in there. One way to do that is just to create it ourselves, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a new class called control templates. And when I have this XAML and CS in the extension, then it probably going, the Visual Studio understands that I want this file as the code behind for control templates. Now, because this class is a dictionary, I have to inherit from resource dictionary. And it's, of course, a partial class because we are a XAML and part of the class is defined in the XAML file. So we make it public and partial. And here we have to say that this dictionary is an instance of this control templates class. Like so. And now we will be able to define this event handler. Hit F12 and Visual Studio will create one for us. And here I am going to do two things. I'm going to check for commands and I'm going to check for keys. So here I got the binding to text property of the text box. If there isn't anything binded to it, then we just return because we don't have anything to change. But if we do, we check for the key that was pressed. If it was enter, then we accept the new value. And if it was escape, then we revert back to the old value and lose focus to this text box. So if it is enter, then I'm going to check if there is a command in here and something that I can use to bind a command, because remember there is no command value here. There's a no command property to bind to, but I can use the tag of this to kind of misuse it to bind the command. So I can use this to bind the rename command to it. Well, technically, if I want to do it right, I should make my own TextBox class and then make a dependency property that is a command and use that to bind the command. But that's a bit too much work. Maybe I'll do that later, but for now, I'm just going to do this like so. So going back to the control templates, I can check the tag property if it is a command. So here I check if there is a command in this tag. And if the command can be executed with the text that we have, Then we call the execute method of this command with the text in the text box. If there is no command in the tag, then we just update the source that is binded to this text box. That means that we are binding directly to the property without using a command, which is fine. But then we have to update it whenever we press enter. And then we just clear focus because we are done here, right? I set the eHandled to true so that our keystroke isn't picked up by anything else in the text box. Here, whenever we press escape, the target is updated. That means that we read back the old value from the property that is binded to this text box, and then again, clear focus. So this should define a global behavior for all our text boxes in the application. Now, if I run the application, then can open this. Let's add a couple of entities and save the project. And now I can change this. It's not working because I'm not using this dictionary anywhere, of course. The application doesn't know about what we just did. So there's one more step to do, and that's to include all these dictionaries that we'll be making here to the application dictionary. So we have application resources here, and we put here all the dictionaries that we create. So here's a resource dictionary, and I'll merge all the dictionaries that we have into one. And the one that we just created is this one. So there will be more dictionaries, but we already include this one to be used with the application. So now I hit enter and we see that it's changed the name of the entity. Now I can go here and change it again and hit escape this time, and it's reverted back to what it was. So that's working well. Okay, I don't really see anything out of place. So that's good. The only thing I want to do is to go here and make this control invisible or hidden whenever we don't have a selection here in our entity list. Here in game entity, I'm going to use a scroll viewer because eventually the list of our components will be a bit longer. So we will have to need a scroller to be able to scroll through them. And here I can define the scroll viewer style to be invisible whenever the data context is null. So whenever no game entity is selected, then this control will be invisible. Okay, now I can see that there is nothing here because I don't have any selection. And now I can see that there is one. Okay, now I forgot to use the command for this checkbox as well, so we can make that undoable too. So going back to the game entity, I already had this command, IsEnable command, and I can now do the same as I did for the renaming. And this time there will be a Boolean. And we don't need a predicate. Okay, this is the body of the relay command. And in the game entity, instead of doing do the binding directly to this property, I can just show it. So here in IsChecked, I retrieve its value to show, and then I can use the command to actually set it. So here I have to give a command parameter, and that's whether this checkbox is checked or not. And the IsChecked property of this checkbox is a Boolean, and I can give that as the command parameter referring to this checkbox control. And I think that's all we have to do to make this undoable as well. Let's see if it works. Here, you can see that the enabled button is checkbox is checked, and then now I can uncheck it, and here I can see that we just disabled empty game entity. And I can check it again, change the selection, and now when I undo, we should see this checkbox go away now and then reappear. Okay, that works. I think I have a little more time in this video to set up a simple logging class so we can show log messages as well. Here in the utilities, I'll add a new class. And here I'll just define log messages and implement a list that can hold them and display them. So first off, I'll have an enum for message types. And our log messages will be information and warnings are errors. Notice that I defined the value of these enum fields as the binary flags, so we can R this together. And that comes in handy when we want to filter the different kinds of messages. So, for example, we only show error messages or we only show warnings and info. etc. So we can logically OR this together to define which kind of messages we want to display. And then I'll have a message class to define what is in a message. This is a log message, and it has a time when it was issued, a type, the message itself, and which file it came from. So for example, if we log a message in serializer, for example, then we'll have the name of that file here, the caller function where this log message was produced, the line of code where it was, and this metadata, it combines a couple of fields to give us this message that it was from this file and caller and this line. And because all of these properties are getters, we have to use a constructor to set them. Okay, here I use the getFileName method to get just a file name, because as we'll see, the way I will be getting the file name, it gives me the whole path of that file. And it's rather lengthy, and I just need the file name. So here in the logger, I'll need a private observable collection that holds the messages. And it will be static because I want all the messages from all threads from everywhere in the application to go to a central place, to one place to be displayed. I don't want to have multiple loggers. So I'll make it static. And when something is static, it's automatically read only, I think. So that is not necessary. And now because we have here static fields, I can already set this collection. I can bind these together already. And that's basically it. I need a method to actually record messages. Because I called this method from different threads. Well, not right now, but I will be calling this method from different threads. And they are not necessarily from the UI thread. I need to make this so that the new messages are added to the message list on the UI thread. Otherwise, the WPF application would give me an error. So the way I can do this is to make this asynchronous. Here I can get where the caller file is and what the caller method is, and the line of the code where this function is invoked. So like I was saying, I want this message to be added to the list on the UI thread. So what this does is it creates a new task on the UI thread, and that's the current dispatcher of this application. And it just calls it. I'm using begin invoke because I don't want to wait for this to happen. I just go further with what I was doing before I was calling this method. So the UI thread can just find a time slot to do this. And yeah, that's kind of all there is to it. But of course, I want to be able to filter these messages as well. So before that, I'm just going to do a method to clear the messages. And for filtering the messages, I need a collection view source. And the source of these messages is messages, the unfiltered messages. And now I'll have another method to set the filter value. So this one is a property. And then this mask is just a value, an integer that is the result of logically ORing these message types together. So here I'll have a field that can remember that. So its default value is that we display all kinds of warnings. And here we can set a different value for it. And whenever that happens, we have to refresh these filtered messages. And then we need a static constructor to set, to configure these filtered messages. So here I can say what the condition is to accept messages with a certain kind of message type. So this is a Lambda expression that will get called for each item in the list to be filtered whenever we call refresh. So here I get the type of the item that we are considering to decide whether it should be in the filtered messages list or not. And then we see if the filtered bits contain the bits of this type. So for example, if it's if this item is an error message, then the third bit should be set as well. So basically, for example, if we have a message filter equals the binary 0 this actually. So the first bit is info, which is 1. And the second bit is warnings. So we don't display warnings when this is not set. And errors we do display. So if this item that we are considering is an error, then the logical end of the type and the message filter will be non-zero, so it's accepted. And the same happens if it's an info message. But whenever it's a warning, then this will give us 0 and it will be excluded from the filtered list. So this is all I need for now for a logger class, which also needs to be static, of course. Well, it doesn't have to be static, but it's nicer if it is. Because we only have static methods here and static fields. So save this, and in the utilities, I'll create a new user control to display these messages. So for now, because we are running out of time for this video, I'm going to just display the messages, all the messages that we receive, and I'll work on this further in the next video. For now, I'm just going to have a list of messages. So this time, because we are binding to a static class, we can have that as the data context, because the data context typically it needs to bind to a non-static class. I can use the static keyword here. And then bind to filtered messages. And it will just be a stack of these messages. Okay, so let's see. I have, of course, to put this somewhere in the editor. So again, going back to the world editor, I can, here, we have the UndoRedo view. So I can make this a tab control and then put a second tab in there for the log messages. Now all I have to do is to generate some messages. For example, in project, whenever we save a file, I can go here and say logger log. The message type is info. Okay, and let me see. One thing I need to do here, unrelated to this message thing, is that whenever we unload a project, we also have to reset the undo redo class. So because we are going to load a new project and the things that we did for the old project aren't relevant anymore. So we throw away everything in the undo redo. And in the serializer, well, let's actually look for all our to-dos in this project and replace them whenever we need an error to be logged. We can now use our log view. So here, one thing I also want to do is to rethrow these exceptions, because now whenever something bad happens, it's basically ignored and the application runs as if nothing happened, but we are in a bad state. So we should actually rethrow the exceptions. And now, of course, everything is okay, except I need to... Okay. My tab control items are very tiny, so I'll just fix that real quick. So here in tab item for the undo, I can say it's a history. And here, this is the log. So the history here is displayed, what we do as the undo redo actions. And in a log, the only thing now I can do is to save. And it says project saved to this file. So yeah, next time I'm going to make buttons here to filter messages and to clear the log history or log messages. And I'll continue work on these components again. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus, there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering.